This is a Zoom webinar we put together amongst Labour Left Alliance in Northern Ireland branch, alongside Labour Left Alliance itself, to kind of celebrate May Day, have a bit of a rally of the left, per se, since we obviously are stuck inside given the circumstances. My name's Lewis NESBITT. I'm part of Labour Left Alliance Northern Ireland. I've got Sam Gibson as well as a panelist. He's part of Labour Left Alliance Northern Ireland. We're working together to chair this meeting. With us as our speakers today, we're lucky to have Tina Werkmann. She's part of our Labour Left Alliance group. She's a key founder in Labour Left Alliance. And we also have Donal O'Cofaigh. He's a councillor from Fermanagh and Omagh district. They're both going to talk to us today about organising on the left in every aspect of life, really, from the political side, as a trained unionist, and everywhere in between, people powered movements. And I'm really glad to have them on board, because it's great to have a great range of speakers on the topic. Tina is going to give a quick intro into herself, what she's about, what she's worked on. Tina, if you want to work away there.
Yeah. So, shall I do my 10 minutes now? Or
yes, go ahead. Yes.
All right. I'm gonna have to try this. Okay. Hiya. I'm, as Lewis said, I'm Tina Werkmann. I'm involved in Labour Left Alliance because of the fact that I'm in Labour Against the Witch Hunt, which was set up in 2017 to step up and speak up against the witch hunt that was going on against Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters in the Labour Party. And from there, in last year, really, the need to organise more concretely and more on a wider political basis became quite apparent to us. And we got together with a number of local Labour left groups and at the time the LRC, Labour Representation Committee, and formed the Labour Left Alliance to put our politics on a as I say, wider basis. We didn't at the time think that the defeat of the left would happen so quickly. It has to be said. We thought it would last a little while longer, Corbyn being in the leadership. But I think we have to now, quite important to have to take stock where we are and how we got here. We have suffered a huge defeat, I believe, with the general election result, and then the fact that Jeremy Corbyn thought he has to step back is a huge defeat for the left. The important thing, I think, for me is what lessons do we learn from that, and how do we carry on from here? And there is a huge realignment going on the left at the moment. Everything is in flux, really. It's really difficult to put a finger on, which organizations are evolving, which will last longer, which will go down the pan soon. So it's all very much in flux. Politically, I think what happened with the defeat is as activists in the Labour Party, of course, we always knew the right had it in for Jeremy Corbyn from day one. They did everything in their power to stop him, to defeat him, and get rid of him. We knew there was the three main groups, I think, that really worked very hard in the last 5 years to undermine Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters. There was the right wing in the Labour Party who feared that he would radically transform the Labour Party and thereby the country, the wider country, and give confidence to the working class to step up and take matters into their own hand. Secondly, I think there was the right outside the Labour Party and their supporters in the establishment media, and they certainly played a huge role. But also, and don't worry, I won't go on this about this too much. There is the pro-Israel lobby who feared that Jeremy Corbyn would destroy the Labour Party as a reliable ally for its future military endeavours and other endeavours in the Middle East. So I think there were three quite distinctive groups of people who worked quite hard to undermine and defeat Jeremy Corbyn. Of course, the recently leaked report gives us ample proof of what has been going on. The sniding, the undermining, the funneling money into to right-wing candidates and starving left-wing candidates, etc., etc. So there's ample proof of that going on. We always knew it, of course, but it's good to see it on black and white, I think. I think what's not so much in the report, or which actually you have to read a little bit between the lines, is something that might be controversial, but I think it's hugely important that we understand it. The report reflects a certain tenor, it reflects a certain viewpoint of what has been going on in the Labour Party. And it's been written basically by people in support of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour leadership and his allies. And I think what the report shows is that Jeremy Corbyn, but especially John McDonnell and John Landsman, running Momentum, have certainly gone to war against what they perceive to be anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. They've certainly left no stone untouched. The problem is, I think it's very questionable if they either understood or willingly misunderstood what anti-Semitism actually is. I think John McDonnell and John Landsman in particular, in a futile attempt to appease and quieten down the critics on the right, uncritically supported the so-called definition by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which has two main problems. Firstly, it's not a definition because it's very open-ended. And secondly, it purposefully conflates criticism of Israel and the state of Israel with anti-Zionism. With anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews. So anti-Zionists, critics of the actions of Israel were tainted as anti-Semites. And unfortunately, the report gives us quite concrete proof that this was, that Jenny Formby in particular have gone after people that I don't believe are anti-Semites. Jackie Walker, Ken Livingstone, Chris Williamson, Mark Wadsworth, Asa with Stanley, Tony Greenstein. The list is very, very long, and these are just the prominent people. In the report, it's quite clearly that they went after these comrades, and I believe they were thrown to the wolves with many hundred others in an attempt to shut up and quieten the right. Nothing these comrades ever said or done, in my view, is even vaguely anti-Semitic. They've been put through hell, smeared and vilified in the mainstream press. Unfortunately, often with the support sometimes of John Landsman, for sure. The problem with Jeremy Corbyn was that he didn't speak up about it, I believe, that he did not put his foot down and said, this is not anti-Semitism. These are actually my comrade. And these people have been his comrades for many years, some of them. So I think the fact that the Corbyn leadership had stayed quiet in this period and sometimes even colluded in the witch hunt is, in my view, an absolute tragedy, a tragedy for the left, and perhaps it's unforgivable. We certainly shouldn't forget what has happened. We should not forget what mistakes have been made. The problem is, of course, the main problem with this is it didn't work. It did not work. Appeasing the right and trying, folding on the IRA definition, folding on the Board of Deputies, 10 demands, etc. None of it worked. The right would not shut up. Every little step back that Corbyn took, they pushed forward and demanded some more and increased their demands and demanded all sorts of things of him. And they smelled blood, of course, and they continued and increased their smears. So I think we have to learn some serious lessons there, that appeasing the right simply does not work. They will not stop. It just makes them stronger. And unless we understand this lesson, I think we're bound to make the same mistakes over and over again. That's the real problem. I'm not here to denounce Jeremy Corbyn or denounce his allies on the leadership. That's pointless. It's, he's a good guy. He's encouraged loads of people, hundreds of thousands, to join the Labour Party. The problem is that we should learn some lessons from that, and next time anybody of us comes close to the position that Corbyn was in, we really could have made some dramatic changes. We could have radically transformed the Labour Party. Open selection, I think there was a huge mistake that Jeremy Corbyn did not throw his weight behind the demand for open selection of parliamentary candidates. We could be in a hugely more powerful position now. but I think huge opportunities were just missed in the mistaken belief that we could stop the critics and stop the right from attacking him over and over again. And I think the lessons for me basically is that will not work. The next time we're anywhere close such an important point in our history, we really have to take the fight to the right, take them on and defeat them politically and say the Labour Party is a party of and for the working class. It's a socialist party. It should be a socialist party. And we will fight for this openly and honestly. And I think he could have, you know, the Labour Party could have been in a much better position when it comes to the election, when it comes to building actually the working class movement from below, building roots in the working class, like the Social Democratic Party did in Germany and at the earlier 20th century. I think that there's some huge mistakes and huge missed opportunities that come from that. But anyway, we need to move forward now. So learning lessons is for me a very important that we learn lessons so we don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So now comes the point to where we go from now, and that is another huge question. There's, as I said, there's huge realignments of the left happening at the moment. We've got Transform Momentum going on. We've got Don't Leave Organise going on. There's a few other organizations. I don't even know all their names. We'll have to see where they all go. The Labour Left Alliance is somewhat similar and somewhat different from all of these efforts. As I say, we were set up in August to gather perhaps the more radical left in the Labour Party who are believe it's important to step up to the witch hunt, which also has to mean you're sometimes critical of the left leaders like Corbyn and John McDonnell. And I think that's an important crossroad, really. I do notice a certain attempt by groups on the left to basically now, in the name of unity, forget what happened in the last 5 years. You know, we should just move on and rally behind, I don't know, the next big thing, the next big leader, and just forget what happened. That is not just, I think that's quite insulting to a number of people who have been vilified and expelled, you know, Jackie Walker, Mark Wadsworth, and a lot of other people, good comrades. I think we have to remember what happened there, so that we don't basically make the same mistake. But also, I said, politically, it's quite important that we say this didn't work. You know, it didn't work just in the name of unity with the right to just brush our differences under the carpet. So that I think makes the Labour Left Alliance quite different to others. We are, of course, in favour of unity. We've approached Don't Leave Organise, which is made up of the Labour Representation Committee and Jewish Voice for Labour, both groups with good comrades in it. Sadly, we haven't heard yet back, but I hope that they are in favour of you know, real unity with us. We've got about 2,300 supporters now, Labour Left Alliance, 40 local groups affiliated, and I think this is the key of the Labour Left Alliance is organising on the ground, organising the many left Labour groups that have sprung up in support of Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't feel that momentum represented them, and who had real differences with what was going on there, and didn't feel that momentum was democratic enough or politically left-wing enough, and basically, you know, left momentum. So we have 6 momentum branches have affiliated, which is fantastic. And so we're working, you know, with them, trying to encourage people like yourselves, you know, to set up groups, local groups, and affiliate to us as soon as possible. and you know, we've got a Zoom account that we're using at the moment. We're very happy to share that for comrades to hold their meetings, etc. But yes, I think it's probably best if comrades have questions or comments about what exactly the LLA is, I can answer some questions later on. I'll leave it there.
That's great. I think next we're going to have Donal speaking. I think Tina represents a lot of the political mechanisms behind the Labour Party, you know, the frustrations that the left inside the Labour Party has. There's a lot of moving parts in there that need to be carefully examined, and it is quite hard. As I'm a young member, you know, it's a lot of mechanisms in place that that are quite confusing sometimes, and Labour Left Alliance definitely represents a best effort to try and unite the left under a very broad umbrella and say, look, this is how we're going to work together inside the party. And a part of that, in my personal opinion, is how to also connect with grassroots campaigns, popular movements. And I think Donal is a great representation of that. He's a councillor in, like I said before, Fermanagh and Omagh district, and he's been fighting a very ground level fight that has been quite courageous, and also has done exceedingly well. Has won a few battles, to say the least. Donal, do you want to kind of talk about yourself and then kind of say where you're from and your background, because that's definitely important.
All right, thanks for, first of all, the invitation to speak to the Labour Left Alliance. My own personal background, I've been active politically since being a teenager, really, and I'm certainly active mentally as politics is developed really from your experience. And as a young person, very young person, under the age of 5, I would have been politicised by events in the Troubles. And it was natural, coming from my own background, that I would go and try to seek change through the Republican movement. And I spent 12 years at various levels, senior and not so senior, in Sinn Féin at the onset of the peace process. But it became very apparent to me that the methodology adopted by the Republican movement, which was one basically of communitarian building, and also a collapse to neoliberal norms, was not going to achieve the sort of change I wanted to see in my lifetime. So I started looking further afield, and I joined the Socialist Party. It was a small, hardcore Trotskyist organization. And I would have built then for another 10 years on the back of that in various campaigns, inserted myself into every single campaign in the locality in where I live, which is Fermanagh and Omagh. And as you say, sometimes you can achieve quite a lot just by organising yourself, and by decisive, firm, disciplined, grassroots organising methods. Usually you can either mitigate or overturn a threat or a decision that you don't agree with, like such as austerity. And what we did was, like for example, in the fracking campaign, took years and years to build a grassroots mobilisation, which was really quite inspiring to witness it. It surprised me, who was working on it for 4 years beforehand, that a community could mobilise 24/7 for 3 weeks to blockade basically these vehicles from coming in, and were readying themselves for what would come if they did come in. At the same time then, I decided that really my politics, being socialist politics, I should orientate myself more towards the trade union movement. And that was to move away from move on from perhaps the anti-austerity activism that we'd engaged with right across the board. And so we started to really go within the trade unions, and particularly Unite the Union, to build connections, cross-community connections, working class connections, organising workplaces, organising like the fight back on the ground. And with in the middle of that, as we were achieving quite a lot of growth in terms of connections and weight, Jeremy Corbyn come along. It was like a blast from the past in the sense this is old style social democracy within the Labour Party. And obviously some of us went into the Labour Party to see if there was an opportunity now to advance the sort of politics we'd like to see in that party. And basically I found that there was huge, like there was a groundswell. I think around 3,000 people had either joined or affiliated to the Labour Party in Northern Ireland, but the Labour Party in Northern Ireland is not allowed to stand. The one party that could unite people on a cross-community basis. The only way you can take on sectarian politics is to unite people behind Labour politics, in my honest opinion. Certainly only for working class people, and the working class are the most divided. So we sought and fought a battle, people like Sam Gibson there, to try and encourage the Labour Party to run with or without the authorisation of London, with the aim of actually providing an opportunity for working class people to have a politics that reflects our needs and also our aspirations. But obviously that was unsuccessful. But in the middle of that, an opportunity came to run, and I certainly did run as a candidate, and both myself and my election agent, who was Adam Gannon, were expelled from the Labour Party on the back of that. We didn't obviously win the assembly seat that I was running for, but on the back of that, we did win a council seat, and that came in particular on following a number of actions, protests around local hospital services, but also strike actions in local employers, in particular Balcast, which is a timber yard not far from Enniskillen. So really, my politics is around grassroots organising and trying to extend that into like a act locally and think globally sort of socialist approach and internationalism. And for me, the Labour Party potentially represents a vehicle for working class people. At the same time, I think we have to be realistic and look at the history of the Labour Party. It has always been like the second squad of the capitalist establishment or the imperialist establishment in Britain. The social democracy that certainly was huge in Germany, that's been referenced earlier on, I think it employed 2 million people. Party of the Social Democrats in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. Just in 1899, the leader of the party, Bernstein, had written that you didn't have to do anything too seriously and you could achieve evolutionary socialism. And I think the lesson is in particular from what Corbyn has experienced, that the idea of evolutionary socialism is a bit naive. The state that we face is a very serious obstacle in our way. It is very aggressive. The state agencies play a very decisive role in terms of countering any genuine challenge. And obviously the Labour Party under Corbyn represented a huge opportunity for working class people. In a sense, it was almost an unforeseen outcome. No one expected Jeremy Corbyn to do as well as he did, let alone Jeremy Corbyn, I think, when he ran in 2015. The opportunity really came because the right wing in the party overplayed their hand and allowed and took away the trade union block votes, which were effectively a bulwark against the real genuine left coming through, and allowed one member, one vote. And that outcome really transformed the Labour Party as actually a lightning rod for working class people. And so for me, and for many others, the Labour Party has got that potential in it, but I think it's a rare potential, and really it's about what is the best vehicle for us to advance a class politics that actually empowers working class people, and in particular in a Northern Ireland basis, what is the best vehicle for us to advance class politics, working class Labour politics that unites people across the sectarian divide. And I think if we can find that it would be quite successful, that if we can ever get to that point. But I think that there's a huge amount of vested interests out there. There's a lot of interested parties to make sure that we don't get a vehicle that can actually bring together people from both sides of the community on a cross-community working class basis that is consistent and principled. So I am trying to use my position in a council in rural part of Northern Ireland to advance the sort of politics that I think can, it's like if you light a prairie, you can get a prairie fire. The spark that can light that fire can sometimes come from somewhere unexpected. And I think that we need to see how we can make more of that and try to develop that sort of politics on a grassroots basis. And certainly I, for one, would like to see more cooperation between those who are genuine on the left, whether inside or outside of the Labour Party in Britain or in Northern Ireland, with an aim of actually bringing forward a powerful, united, working class left-wing agenda, which would transform everything before us because it's really needed. I don't think I have to explain that to anyone. And I think people are looking for it more than ever before. And even with this COVID crisis, I think the universality of the threat globally, but also the role of the working class, and in particular in Northern Ireland, many of the battles I'm involved with as a Unite official, or activist rather, are very pronounced, and there's a great sense of the working class being the organised working class at the vanguard of real opposition to what's happening. But at the same time, it could go a lot further, and I think we need to see how that needs to be given a political dimension. And I think the Labour Party in Northern Ireland has a particular role to play still, and certainly the left Labour activists have a very genuinely central role to play, because we need to make this mainstream. We need to see it become mass, and we need to see how we can bring this sort of political agenda to all parts and all communities in this region.
Thanks very much there, Donal. That was great. Donal definitely represents a lot of the frustration felt by a lot of working class people who want to rise above the sectarian politics of Northern Ireland, and you know, his past of working as a part of Sinn Féin and then moving on represents a lot of what's happening here, where people are trying to move on. Like they begin to see the problems with various parties that are obviously massive here, and then they look for an alternative that can provide that anti-sectarian position. I think that's a great start to actually go into the basis of this whole webinar. You know, this is obviously May Day. If this pandemic wasn't so infectious, I think, and if this wasn't a pandemic and this was just an economic collapse rather than something that was actively keeping the working class from being able to take to the streets, I think people would be taking to the streets, especially today. You know, this happened just before May Day, and the frustration is building up. And it's what Tina talked about, is the left needs to use this energy and move forward. And, you know, there's been massive defeats across these islands, the British Isles, you know, UK, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland. There's been defeats in the left, or there's been a shift in landscape for the popular left. You know, obviously we had the general election defeat in December. Keir Starmer is now the leader of the Labour Party. You know, that's going to affect the whole of the UK. And then talking about Ireland, Irish Labour Party is beginning to collapse. Effectively, it's already collapsed in many minds. You know, I think they only got 4% or so in the general election. You know, Sinn Féin is rising as that left-wing frustration down south. And then here in Northern Ireland, the SDLP is on the rise from their pro-EU sentiment. You know, that's a shifting ground for anyone who looks at these popular quotation marks, I guess, left-wing parties and what's happening to them. And like Tina said, like, we're trying to move forward, and even just this last week has highlighted the problems that the left in the Labour Party has had, where obviously there's a lot of drama revolving around Diane Abbott in the last few days, where she was singled out for holding a platform with Jackie Walker, which has been a massive confusing situation, as Starmer has to make a decision on the pledges he made for the board of deputies. Then obviously Keir Starmer also kind of made a decision about Kashmir that went against a lot of the Labour Party membership, whenever the Labour Party membership endorsed internationalism at the basis of Kashmir, self-determination, and Starmer has now decided that Labour should step away from that and give a bit of weight behind the Indian parliamentary process to take care of that. And then to top it off, this leaked report, there's been a lot of voices coming out to say that those who have been chosen to investigate this leak are actually of an anti-left rhetoric. You know, we're not sure 100% who's going to be involved in that just yet, but it seems to be that a lot of the people chosen from it are not fans of Jeremy Corbyn at all. So I don't really see how this is going to be fair. And all that's to correlate to, I know, how is the left meant to respond to all these changing factors, you know, after such a massive a defeat in December, and defeat after defeat in the last few weeks, and also the economic pressure. So I'm going to open this up by talking to Tina first and just saying to her, what is the left's message in the Labour Party, outside the Labour Party, throughout the UK, now that he's the leader, considering he's not only just the leader of the Labour Party, he's also the leader of the opposition for the whole of the UK Parliament, going against Boris Johnson. You know, how is the left going to get their message through to Starmer that, you know, like, we have grievances that need to be answered to, and also we are the ground force as well?
Yeah, little question there. Well, it's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, the way to do it, I think, to start, is understanding that, and that I should have said that in my initial notes, is that the Labour Party cannot deliver socialism. I think it's set up quite rightly, as was pointed out earlier by Donal. It's the second 11, isn't it, for capitalism? The Labour Party. It's supposed to be reliable and supposed to be able to take over when the Tories, you know, in shambles as they're at the moment. But the Labour Party is a battleground, I think, for the class war that's going on, and it's certainly under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I think it's really heightened that the fact we really could see that it is a battleground, and the civil war, the class war, was fought in the Labour Party. It's still going on. That's actually an important point to understand. I think that the Labour Party has, from the beginning, it's never been ours. It's never been the working class party. It's never been a socialist party. There's always been socialists in it, communists even, and recognizing, and Lenin, I just had a debate last night, Lenin recognized the need to get involved in the Labour Party, not because he thought it can deliver socialism. He was quite aware of that as well. But it is where the working class looks at its party. Chiefly that is down to the very undemocratic electoral system in Britain, which in the United Kingdom, which you know, first past the post, which means smaller organisations they have very little chance of actually getting into Parliament and using Parliament as a platform. Again, Parliament is unlikely to deliver socialism ever, but it is an important platform, isn't it? It's where you can launch campaigns, you get a much better reception, people listen to you, etc. So that's, I think we have to make that quite clear, that we shouldn't sow illusions that Jeremy Corbyn could have delivered socialism. And I think there is a huge amount of illusion in that on the Labour left as well. It's part of, I think, an attempt, and what we have to now do in terms of educating ourselves that the recognition it will not come from the Labour Party, but we have to go through the Labour Party to get to socialism, to get to a different kind of society. And winning the millions of people who do look to the Labour Party as their party is an important step in that direction, and engaging with the Labour Party, being involved and in convincing comrades in the CLPs, in the branches. It's not much fun. It's like pulling teeth going to a Labour Party meeting. It still is, unfortunately, even with the Corbyn influx. And most of these people most of the people who were inspired by Jeremy Corbyn to join the party never went to meetings, or maybe went to one meeting and thought, what is this? And never came back, because it is dire, and it is bureaucratic, and it's like a different universe, actually, and you have to study the rules to even understand how you can make a point or make a motion. You have to, you have to be an expert on these rules, which might sound like a diversion, because it is a very bureaucratic struggle, and I know lots of people are now leaving the Labour Party in droves, in fact, and we've Labour Left Alliance had a huge discussion on that as well. Should we, we're very clear, we're oriented to the Labour Party. It doesn't mean we kick out people who are now leaving the Labour Party because they're demoralised. Lots of people are. Our task, though, is, I think, to win them back. And not in order to, as I say, not in order to sow illusions that the Labour Party can deliver socialism, but in order to use be as strong as possible in one of the most important arenas of the class struggle. Somebody put in the chat earlier on, what about the unions? Quite right, of course, the unions, we need to get in the unions as well and help democratize them. That's probably even harder at the moment as it is in the Labour Party. In the Labour Party, you do at least get together with a sort of, you know, we could do it, you can organize on a national level if you're involved in something like the Labour Left Alliance. But yes, the struggle in the unions is as important as our local campaigns we're getting involved in. The Labour Party has the advantage of being it's a national platform, isn't it? It's a national struggle. And if you are involved in a national organization like the Labour Left Alliance, you can, you know, we can all move similar motions in branches. We can organize for next conference. I don't think the conference is going to take place this year, or if it does, it'll be perhaps a smaller one, Labour Party conference with, I hear there's lots of stitch-ups going on at the moment on the NEC about, you know, how motions can be moved, etc., because there are no CLP meetings with decision-making powers taking place at the moment. But if we get together, if we stay in touch with each other, and Zoom meetings are actually really good for that in that respect. So actually the pandemic has had a tiny little positive impact in that sense, that we are speaking, you know, where would we have the chance to speak to each other like this under normal circumstances. So actually organizing now nationally on the understanding that it's a battleground rather than the solution is, I think, the way forward, cohering our motions, cohering our delegates, cohering, maybe, you know, we have to think about rule changes that we have to put forward, again, on the selection of candidates, etc. There are, the first one actually we have to change is the 3-year rule. I don't know if comrades know about this. It's the most undemocratic rule in the Labour Party rule book. If a rule change has been discussed, has been moved, even if it's, you know, not being voted on, etc., you cannot discuss it for another 3 years, which means, you know, the NEC last year put forward a whole raft of rule changes that were contained within a huge document, which means none of these issues can be touched now, like disciplinary process, etc. Hugely undemocratic. So that is something I think the left should really gather around quite soon and get rid of that rule, because it's been misused many, many times. I leave that.
Thanks very much there. Donal, from your perspective, you know, you're not obviously, you're independent in terms of your socialist policies. You know, you're not under the rule of Labour Party or even Irish Labour or anything like that there. So from your perspective of a councillor who's enacting socialist policies, who's pushing for the socialist fight, how do you see the likes of Starmer and in the South, the new leader of the Irish Labour Party, Alan Kelly, how do you see these people, you know, interacting with popular socialism? You know, what's that effect there, and how do you react to that yourself?
It's hard to even think about the likes of Alan Kelly and interacting with socialists after his abysmal involvement in the water charges. He's a hate figure among most trade unionists in the South, among most working class people. This is the problem. Social democracy is, across Europe, has been in trouble. And precisely because they've adapted to the neoliberal norm that became everywhere ubiquitous and dominant, hegemonic in ideological terms, across Europe at the end of the 70s, early 80s. And everywhere that has happened, they've basically taken on a managerial role within the capitalist economy. It has completely disabled them from doing anything but the most bare delivery of outcomes. So you did get some minor concessions, for example, or some improvements under even like the likes of Blair, who brought in like minimum wage legislation and so on. But nothing fundamental changed for working class people. And because of that, and a similar process in many European countries, social partnership eroded the foundations of active trade unionism in workplaces, because it became, again, a managerial, negotiated process. disconnected from the realities of the grassroots members. In fact, the grassroots members who would have been opposed to it were targeted. And similar, I'm sure, in the Labour Party inside, in the period of Blair, the likes of Jeremy Corbyn would have been very much sidelined. And if they were considered to be a threat, they would have been removed, I think, at that stage. But they made a mistake. They underestimated them like everyone else did. But this whole process has eroded the social foundations of social democracy, and indeed has eroded the power of the trade unions themselves. They do not perform the same role as they would have done, say, in the 70s. So there's a real risk that what Jeremy Corbyn was almost the outlier of return back to traditional social democratic aims. And it was, in historic terms, Jeremy Corbyn wasn't even that radical, in the sense that some of his programme, you could still find parts at which Churchill's programme would have been more aggressive towards capital. But in relative terms, in the immediate terms, he was obviously a huge outlier for what's happened in social democracy. He inspired hundreds of thousands of people to join. Unfortunately, maybe it's the nature of fighting the Labour Party, but he didn't pursue from day one, almost like the ground war they needed to conduct against the right wing. They got reorganised. They had a few pushes against them, failed, and then they finally they have managed to seal on the back end of a very bad election where he took a position on Brexit, which disconnected even further from the working class in large swathes of England. And I think all of this has left the door open almost for a return back to that normal social democratic position. But at this point in time, you're seeing these parties really humbled in many countries, not all, but in many countries, there has been a total, almost liquidated. And the situation in the Republic of Ireland is probably even more advanced than it has been for years. The leadership of the Labour Party has been really cataclysmically bad for working class people for decades now, and they have virtually no support at all within the working class areas. They tend to get their support from more middle layers, management within, especially like more better off paid public sector workers, but they don't really have anything when it comes to the working class, and no basis of organisation. They don't have a social base. So to me, the idea of looking to the south for a Labour Party, it would be toxic for the national question in Northern Ireland anyway. But then you look to Keir Starmer, and like Keir Starmer, if you look what he's attacking on now, he's actually challenging the government because they don't have an exit strategy. At the very moment when workers are most likely, I think, to perhaps challenge the early rollout of an exit strategy in order to preserve the interests of British capitalism, at the very moment when workers are actually, like in CWU right now, balloting for strike action, and you're seeing a wave in Northern Ireland of walkout wildcat strike actions in meat factories to get basic PPE, when nurses aren't even getting tested, when people in care homes aren't being tested before they die. There's huge cover-ups. All this is before him. But the one issue he latches onto is why we're not exiting, or have we got an exit strategy? So this is very much positioning himself, as far as I can see, as we said before, the second 11 position, with the aim of maybe winning that middle ground or contesting it a la Blair. But I don't think he is a Blair. I think he's not going to succeed. He's more near a Kinnock, as far as I can see. His role is really to clean out the left. And I think after that, you could see a return back to much more normal mainstream right-wing Labour type politics. And that would be my fear. So the question for me is never about a particular party. It's about where's the class, where's the class looking. And at the moment, I don't get the sense that the working class is looking to Labour. Labour is languishing in the polls at the moment. The Tories have actually got the bounce, and they're actually connecting to more retrograde elements of the working class successfully. There's a real danger in that. And we need to see how we can engage ourselves to try and reconnect to the class. And yes, if Labour was to become a vehicle, that I think we should we should go back into it personally. But in Northern Ireland, we don't even have that option. So what we're about is it has to be much more organic, I think. The Labour Party here has many members. There's very good people in the Labour Party in Northern Ireland, but they're not allowed to run in elections. And how can we link together with comrades? There are comrades going to be in the Labour Party, like there has been for decades. There's always been socialist in it, that's true. Always been Marxist in it. How are we going to link with those comrades? How are we going to link with people like myself who are out there in the trade union movements and in the anti-austerity movements? How can we work together? I think that's the key issue. And in a sense, the politics of Keir Starmer, it isn't going to invigorate anyone. I do think working class people may look to him as an option against the even more terrible Tories eventually, but I'm not convinced of that fact even. That's how rough it is. So I think we need to go back to basics, and I actually think we'd be better off going back to basics. But the final point I want to make is that it's always very easy to get yourself kind of into the rut of thinking that things are going to roughly remain where they're at. But I think what you said earlier on, Lewis, is that there has been a massive radicalization out there. And the fear of the COVID crisis is certainly keeping that back a bit. But I think that there is going to be something of an enlightenment of the working class. There already has been in Northern Ireland. We had a tidal wave of actions before this COVID strike crisis. And there was stuff moving in England with the CWU, with various other workplaces, and then COVID come along and it's put things back a bit, but I think it's boiling up. Yesterday in Chile, you look what happened at the May Day, there was workers out there in Chile who had massive mobilizations. Lebanon, you can go around the world, there was lots of places where there was a real upsurge just before the COVID crisis. It's come along, it's cut across that, but it's now starting to percolate. And I think small things can grow into big things. And I think that we need to be very aware that what we're experiencing now may not always be the case, and that growth can happen, unexpected growth out of nowhere. And where will it go? It could go to the Labour Party, it could go elsewhere. We have to be open to all of that.
I think that's a great highlight of how people have to begin to see, especially the left, especially young people like myself, where you do put faith in these parties, you put faith in them, and they disappoint you. And it's about recognizing that, yes, the parties can do good, but also they can disappoint you. But that doesn't mean you abandon them completely. It's trying to maybe fight a fight on both sides, but never rely on the party itself. Sam, do you want to mention something there?
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to ask, Lewis, is it in any way possible to get the other people who are in attendance today to introduce themselves so that we bring them in here at some stage as soon as possible? And then I'd like to say just a few things.
In terms of questions and answers, I was going to put that near at the end to have people come in and ask a few questions. If you want to begin. Is it
possible just now? Is there any mechanism now for just for them able to introduce themselves, to tell us who they are, just to bring them in? Is that possible, Tina?
We currently have 17 people in attendance.
Right.
So it would be it would eat up a lot of time, but
okay. Well,
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
I just wanted to say that we know that the parliamentary road to socialism has always been something of a dead end or a blind alley. That's always been the case. But there'd be absolutely no point in even being in the Labour Party if you didn't think that it couldn't mitigate against some of the worst aspects of capitalism. And as proof of that, you have the National Health Service. Now, this takes us on to the situation of people who are talking about leaving the Labour Party because Corbyn suffered this massive defeat. I don't see the point in that, because I think it would be rather like the analogy of a bird trying to fly on one wing. I mean, there's still a massive amount of the Labour movement that's mobilised within the Labour Party, not least of all the trade unions that are affiliated still to the Labour Party. They don't show any sign of walking. So I wouldn't want to walk until perhaps the trade unions, were re-examining their position on this. So the problem then is, particularly with first past the post, if people leave and they go out into to George Galloway or to Chris Williamson or to whatever, Respect, Rise, etc., they all tend to run into the sands of the margins because of the first past the post system. But what is the way forward for the left in the Labour Party under Starmerism? The fact is that hundreds of thousands of people come into the Labour Party because of the impetus of Corbyn, and the motives for that were, you know as well as me, the reaction to the rampant inequalities of wealth and power in the country, a deep-seated sense of social alienation, and the effects of years and years of austerity policies on working-class communities. A number of those people have peeled away to Starmer when they voted for him. Soft left peeled away to Starmer to some degree as well. Starmer presented a policy platform of 10 pledges, as I remember. And those 10 pledges were actually leftist positions. Now, whether he sticks to those is another matter, but it must be surely a central role for the left in the Labour Party to try and hold him to those pledges as far as is possible, and to mobilise CLPs and union branches and so on around opposition to any resiling away from those particular pledges. Now, at the moment, Keir Starmer, has set up this, just to shift to another topic, he set up the independent inquiry into the leaked report. I'm not sure it's that independent in terms of if you examine the personnel that are in it. But let's see what comes out of that. Donal's quite right. His response to the coronavirus crisis has been, I think, very kind of soft pedaling, where he should have been going harder on the issues that matter around PPE and ventilators, etc. In terms of Ireland, North and South, quickly, we still have 1,600 members, despite all that has happened in the NICLP. Many of those people, again, came in because of the Corbyn phenomenon, and are still there and have to be mobilised, because I think there will be a big push within the party from, we know, elements more to the right, to try and dominate the CLP on the back of the defeat of Corbyn and the Starmer result. As far as the Irish Labour Party is concerned, another factor is with the Irish Labour Party, it is down now to 4% of the vote in the Republic of Ireland. It has 6 only TDs. It gained a mere 2% of the vote of 18 to 24-year-olds in the last election, which is horrendous when you think about it. If you think of it in terms of what future it might have. It has also disaffiliated itself from the trade union movement. So in a very real sense, you can't credibly think of that party any longer as a legitimate or bona fide Labour Party as such. Now, there would be people in the North talking about linking up with the Irish Labour Party in a sort of umbrella arrangement with the UK Labour Party, and having a kind of a semi-autonomous party in the North here. Now, I don't know how far that'll go. But just to finish up, I would like to hear from people who are going to come in, specifically on not so much analysing what has gone wrong, why the election was lost, but specifically on how do you go forward in the Labour Party under the Starmer leadership if you are of a left persuasion?
Thanks very much, Sam. I think Sam highlights a lot of the arguments of those in LPNI quite elegantly, if I say so myself, if that's the best way to put it. There's a bit of a gap for LPNI. We're obviously a part of the UK. We're obviously deep roots within the Republic. We obviously share this community that we have to, accommodate everyone, and rightly so. And it's difficult to maneuver when you have the UK Labour Party and you have the Irish Labour Party and all the caveats that they bring. So I think that's a lot of issues of what the members have from LPNI on the left side. And one of the things I'd like to ask Donal first maybe is, Donal has worked a lot with political movements, local political movements, and LPNI itself, and obviously Labour Left Alliance Northern Ireland is trying to work alongside those movements, trying to get involved in them. Donal, how do how do you feel you can craft or, you know, work in a successful grassroots campaign, be it your anti-fracking or, you know, anti-austerity? How do you get, you know, working class people involved in, be it independent political movements or a political movement inside a parliamentary system?
It's a very good question. Just before I answer it, I think I just want to say this around what Sam said, because I think there's a very genuine question. How can Labour lefts pursue struggle? Obviously, if you're going to stay within the Labour Party, you're going to be faced with a lot of struggle in the next while, because the direction that the party's going in, the whole institutions of it are going to be pushed in that direction. And a lot of people are leaving, as you're saying, and those who remain will become a smaller voice. But there will be trade unions left. There will be all that sort of thing. One of the key things I think that wasn't really factored into an analysis of why Labour didn't do too well in the last election, it wasn't just about Brexit. It was about, in large swathes of England, in particular in Wales, you've had Labour councils for generations. Absolutely, as far as the mind can see, there's been Labour councils. And these councils have largely implemented all the cuts that the Tories and even the Labour leaderships have sent down to them. And to me, that lack of faith or good faith with their own grassroots, that conveying, like that conveyor belt delivery of the cuts onto your own communities, erodes the support base of Labour. And for me, therefore, Labour left should be really focusing maybe on the council seats at this stage, try and build a base in that level, but to build it on a consistent, principled socialist basis, that you're not going to implement the cuts on behalf of anybody, that we don't agree with these cuts. I would never vote as a councillor in Fermanagh District Council in support of a cut. If it cost me anything, I would not do it. That's I wouldn't be in politics if I believed in that. But you've got a tier upon tier of Labour politicians, and this is what the right wing is in the Labour Party, that are content to do that because that's part of their job, that's their bureaucratic role, and so on and so forth. So that's, for me, one of the key things. In terms of how do you link with working class people, how you mobilise, it's a good question, and it's a great question because you're asking it. Because for me, yeah, there's 1,600 members of the Labour Party. It was 3,000 at one point. But how many were actually really active? I think we have to be very honest with ourselves and say very, very, very few were actively looking into their own communities, actively trade union members, doing stuff in their own unions. How many were proper political activists in the sense that, you know, you'd hope to see? Very, very few, again. And that's a part of the problem, that there's a substitutionalization of struggle within the Labour Party, a Labour Party which we all know isn't going to deliver socialism, and a failure to connect with your own communities, with your trade unions, with your local campaign groups. So that is important that you are asking that question. The answer to the question, I think, is not actually that difficult in a way, because how do anyone get involved in politics? It's because we all, something connects with us. The reality connects with you. For example, if I run a health campaign down here, you always got to start off saying, well, what is the key thing that people will latch onto? How do you concretize the problem? How do you make it actually impact them, right? So, for example, and if there was a £40 million worth of cuts coming to the NHS in our region, our Western region, we concretized that. We found out, right, there's going to be actually an attack on neonatal unit in our local hospital. So as well as all these other things, there was an attack on the neonatal unit. Now, neonatal unit only sees a maximum of you know, eight babies at a time. It's not a huge unit. But the fact that you concretized it around something that people can relate to, and that they actually feel that they have some role or take, and you make the case like, who's going to have a baby here if the nearest neonatal unit, if you have a premature baby, is 2 hours drive away? So you make it affect them directly. You concretize the issue, you make it directly affect them. Then you try to make sure there's a whole lot of work this. You have to then make sure everyone knows about the issue, whether it's social media or even leafleting door to door, which we did do, or raising petitions, and constantly being at it. and then using the trade union structures as actually a mechanism at the time, and it could be Labour Party structures or whatever else. You can use these as a mechanism, as a structure within which you can base your activism that gives you stability. So at one moment you'll be fighting this austerity thing, and another moment you'll be fighting about, you know, keeping libraries open or whatever it is, right? So you keep fighting and you build up over time, and you encourage individuals and develop their capacity to become actors politically, and you recruit them and all that stuff. That's how you do politics, in my opinion. And that's how you build a movement. And that's out of that, you will build a cross-community movement in this place. And that movement is capable of electing someone with quite extreme viewpoints like me. So if it's possible to do that in Enniskillen, then I believe it's possible to do that anywhere in Northern Ireland, and it's possible to do that anywhere. And if you need the Labour Party to do that, that's fine, that's your call. I believe I can do that in a different way. But those who do it within the Labour Party, we can work together on it. You know, it's not about a competition here. It's about a collective effort. So I hope that's answered your question.
That's great. It's great to hear that from Donal. He's got a lot of experience, obviously, in that area, and it definitely highlights that kind of grassroots level that I think Jeremy Corbyn tried to do, hold together with the likes of Momentum, but it wasn't really laser focused per se. It wasn't this ground level work. I found a lot of it was spread to focus on things like just a general theme of anti-austerity, which obviously is fine, but it's like Donal said, if you want to get people in your local area to vote for you through politics, you need to show that you're going to actually help them, that you're going to actually do something for their community. Tina, kind of the same question, a wee bit different, but you know, how can a party use these political movements? Extinction Rebellion's massive right now. It's really engaging with people who generally don't really care about politics, if I'm being honest. You know, there's the anti-war movement that kind of propelled Jeremy Corbyn a bit, per se. You know, how do they utilize it, and maybe should they utilize it? Because there is that risk I've seen where people get into these movements and they try to take control and they try to manipulate the movement to get them power. And I know it's a big question, it might be a wee bit hard, but I just want your insight. Obviously, like you said, you know about the Labour Party, you know how these CLP motions and meetings happen. So yeah, how do you feel about that?
I wish I didn't know it as well as I do. I've actually wrote a guide once and I did my head in trying to work out all the rules and stuff. But you know, as I said, it's not the Labour Party is not going to do it. How do you connect with the people? I mean, it is a very difficult question, especially as in a country with a first past the post system. It does put more emphasis on an organisation like the Labour Party than it does in other countries. So I think it remains an important area of struggle. What I was going to highlight, though, is the question of education, which I think is hugely important and which is something that the LLA is trying to focus now, and in this period where we can't go out and stuff, is education with a purpose. You know, so activity is of course important, you know, that people need a spark to get them into politics. In my case, it was animal rights when I was 16, and I quickly noticed this is going only so far, and you quickly get to the limits of what a single issue campaign can achieve. Like Extinction Rebellion is one of those campaigns. Very good by themselves, and they're encouraging people and they're getting people into politics. But then they need to take the next step, don't they? We need to actually raise the working class, educate the working class, empower the working class to understand the power it has, actually, to understand what difference it could make if it organizes for itself as a class and with itself. And that, in that sense, a problem with the Corbyn movement was that almost the opposite happened. It looked at Corbyn as the Messiah. You know, he had a sort of, he will do it for us. We don't have to do much. He'll deliver it for us. And that's exactly the opposite of what we actually have to do as a left. And education in that sense is hugely important. And an education also that understands the need for democracy. And the need for democracy is very widespread. I don't know, can comrades see that poster in the back there? It's, I can put it a bit closer. It's my favorite poster from the Labour Party. Does that work? Labour clears the way, election poster from 1910. And they are oh, this is very wobbly, but basically when the Labour Party had a position to abolish the House of Lords, which was in 1910. So they actually had some radical demands for democratic change, abolition of the monarchy. You know, these are democratic demands we should raise, but also democracy in the sense of our own structures, our own organization. And you mentioned momentum, you know, which you have to mention, because that was turned in a coup, you know, in an overnight coup by John Landsman. He abolished all democratic structures like that. Kicked out Jackie Walker, a lot of other people who've been expelled from the Labour Party, unjustly, I believe, most of them, and ran it as a fiefdom. And that's exactly what happened. He owns the database personally as a man. You know, he's not only a millionaire, he also owns millions of names, addresses of people who supported Jeremy Corbyn. And with his problematic politics, which, you know, transpired were pro-Zionist, were appeasing the right, etc. I think he's misused that data quite dramatically. There's still some good momentum branches, etc. But I think momentum as an organization has a huge problem with the lack of democracy. Is the key issue. There's now forward momentum is trying to make it a bit more democratic. I think that the ship has sailed personally, but. The importance of education in this area now, at the time now, is also quite important, because as comrades have pointed out, things can change really quickly. Yesterday we had a really interesting session on Lenin, which the video will go up quite soon. Who, I think, was it 3-4 months before the revolution, he was telling somebody, I'll probably not ever be alive when the revolution happens. Boom, you know, hundreds of thousands joined the Bolsheviks, and things changed like that. And that sometimes happens, you know, quantity turns into quality and the other way. So things can quickly change quite dramatically. But then we have to be ready, and I don't think we were ready this time. Corbyn came to his position at the time when the working class struggle was really at a really low class struggle, which, you know, it was very difficult for him to achieve anything more than he did. We could have, you know, we can criticize him for, you know, not transforming the Labour Party, but in terms of the working class movement, it was at a very low level. But, you know, who knows how this pandemic, what happens now? Millions of people unemployed. You know, there's estimates by the International Labour Organization that 1/3 of all people worldwide, or is it even half? I think 1/3 will lose their jobs. Will lose not just their jobs, but their livelihood, and fight for survival, etc. Things can change quite quickly, etc. So the education that we understand what we're educating ourselves for in this period is extremely important, I think. So the LLA is looking at a few series. I've put it in the chat earlier. Next week we'll just be discussing Rosa Luxemburg and the German Revolution, which is, after the Russian Revolution, perhaps the second most important event in our history, I'd say, because that could have changed everything. Had the German Revolution been successful, and it could have probably been successful, then the Russian Revolution perhaps would have not turned into its opposite quite as quickly as it did. Had the European working class been prepared better politically as well to deal with, you know, to use the anger that existed and the real activity on the ground, could have been channeled better, could have been led better, and we could have been in a very different society today. The 20th century could have panned out totally different. So education and the fight for democracy, I think, are our key tasks for the immediate future.
Thanks very much, Tina. That's a great example of two twin versions of how to activate the working class. You have Donal talking about engaging them in things that are materialistic, things that are physical, their hospitals, their libraries, and so on. That's something I can understand, and something that I actually don't understand enough of, and I wish I did, which is education. I think that's hard. It's a very hard concept to get to some people to understand, that you have to try and educate people. And things like webinars, like you said, about Lenin and his teachings, and also the German Revolution. Yeah, fantastic areas to teach people a lot about what's been done before and what can work in the future. We've got some questions from a lot of people. I'm going to go down a list of few different people. I think we'll take a few questions now, keep the discussion moving, and then have a proper Q&A session at the end, but just to kind of answer a few people's questions right now. Andy is one of the first, if he would like to ask a question.
Okay, I'm going to, it's mainly based on what Sam said about the future to the left. And my experience in 1980s, 1990s, especially the 1990s, it's very difficult to be inside the Labour Party at that time. But there was pressure from below, even outside the Labour movement. So the anti-poll tax movement. The anti-poll tax movement, the national unions, Labour Party leaders didn't want to touch the abolish poll. In fact, Labour council jailed people for non-payment. But there were individual trade union branches affiliated to that movement. And that was the biggest demonstration we had in London, and a massive non-payment campaign. It was revolutionary. They pulled down the Prime Minister because of that campaign. And there's other examples. I would say sort of, a few years later, we had the national campaign against domestic violence. And the word domestic violence wasn't even an everyday word that time. It started with feminist movements. Feminists joined the Labour Party, got involved with trade unions, and a lot of the people were suspended. Started in Brighton. They were suspended, first of all, membership-wise, but they still kept active. And that campaign was initially denounced by the Labour Council, local Labour Council in Brighton, has been a left-wing front. But through that influence, the individuals outside the prisons, there was two women who were jailed inside, basically killing the husbands through self-defence, but because their husbands were going to kill them. They were victims of domestic violence. There's Sarah Thornton and Karanja Hawalia, and the women's campaign, do the vigils, got those women released from prison, and then from then on, it was the first campaign. Domestic violence was linked to the trade union movement. It started with trade union branches affiliated to the campaign. Then it started with the Trades Council, the Brighton Hove Trades Council. Then it got linked. Then from then on, it went to a national CPSA, the Civil Servants Union, supported that campaign. Then it took to TUC. It forced a minority Tory government to criminalise domestic violence. And then from then on, it forced a new Labour government under Blair to put domestic violence investigation units in police stations. One of the things about the appalling cutbacks the last 10 years is those, because the cuts in the police, those investigation units have been taken out of police stations again. But it really goes to show, what can be done. And it's not relying on the official wooden structures. You've got to go outside it. I've always said the left is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You do your umbrella campaigns, and then from then on, you use the Labour Party trade unions as a platform to promote those campaigns, and then link in, but also bring the outside groups into supporting whatever trade union struggles or Labour movement struggles are happening. Now, another big thing is the campaign against the Criminal Justice Act. That was Michael Howard's Criminal Justice Act. That united people, Hunt saboteurs, trade unionists, ravers, everybody put together. Down in Brighton, we had what you call an illegal, there was what we call a political squat, an old courthouse. There was a council-owned building going derelict. So we turned it into a sort of a political squat, justice. The campaign was called Justice, with a question mark. We got the trade union council appealed for sort of like plumbers and electrics to crack on the plumbing and electricity. It was absolutely incredible. And we got, and then from then on that campaign, trade unions got involved, linking with all the Hunt Saboteur, all the action groups. Next thing you know, we got trade unions involved in the Hunt Saboteur movement. And that, I would say, that unified campaign, build that big campaign, that forced a new Labour government to abolish fox hunting, criminalise it, and it really goes to show it is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Now, the thing is, there's not parliamentary road or socialism on its own. It has to start from the grassroots. It's like a mountain. It's like building a house. You do the foundation work. That's the communities, trade unions, campaign groups. And then from then on, once you've done that groundwork so well, the rest of it's going to be built so easily, the elections, because you've done a groundwork in the beginning. And I think the problem in the last 5 years is that the left concentrates so much on the Labour Party as far as, we're not even campaigning. It's all collectivism. And that's been half the problem, really, really. And it has been sort of turning Corbyn the Messiah. Now, Corbyn his leadership election campaign was never intended to be the Messiah. He was, he didn't want to be on a pedestal, but unfortunately, he allowed us to be on a pedestal, which I think is a real shame. You know what I mean? Because that wasn't the original intentions. And but I do think the lesson to be learned, when this is not as bad as the 1990s, the Labour Party. Those 10, Sam is right. The 10 pledges we got hold Keir Starmer in, because there will be a battle, because there will be people who backed him, the Israel lobby, who wanted to ditch those 10 pledges. So we've got to make sure we hold him to him, But I do think, if Labour could stand councillors in there, so don't forget, we've got a stronger socialist campaign group of MPs, which is stronger than it was in the 1990s. And then now they've got a socialist campaign group of Labour councillors. I think it's building a support network, a support and accountability network to those groups, both those groups. And then from then on, I think, socialism does come from below, and it's forced from above. And that's what I've always believed.
Andy, Andy, do you have any questions that you would like to ask Donal or Tina? Or I think you mentioned the trade union movement.
But I think Tina already answered that.
Okay.
And I think but I do. Can I also mention? I think it's important trade unions, because we can't democratise the Labour Party. We don't democratise the trade unions. I mean, last year, my union, Unite, and other unions are doing it. What they tend to do, they end up, really having all these drink receptions, knowing that some of these delegates get completely bloody plastered. So the next morning, the morning briefings, they're getting the vote ways of leadership. Now that was really happened, and that annoyed me, because 2018 Unite Conference back to support open selection. Len McCluskey bottled out. Because of Jeremy Corbyn out, and that annoyed me. So to me, if you're trying to democratise the party, democratising the unions, you're putting the cart before the horse. It has to come from the unions first of all, being honest. And I think the problem is, I think Corbyn's leadership, success, being elected leader was an accident. We didn't expect that to happen. You know what I mean? It didn't, there was no, because the foundation wasn't there. But Corbyn did outside work outside the Labour movement, like the anti-war movement, and Labour, assembly against the anti-austerity assembly. But I think now the lesson to be learned is build that, because Starmer, I can't see winning in 4 years' time. I cannot see it. We can build up another leadership in 5 years' time. There will be another left leader, but we'll make sure they're prepared this time. Corbyn was, he was reluctant to go because it was his turn from the Socialist Campaign Group to put his name forward for leader. That's what happened. Do you know what I mean? But we have got people, because of good left MPs, Richard Bergen, Sarah Sultana. Eventually, I can see Laura Peacock coming back. We've got some very good people, so we've got to keep that foundation going. It's not, but I do think it's Northern Ireland. We need an umbrella group. Now, I've got a Facebook group called Northern Ireland for Socialism. It used to be Northern Ireland for Jeremy Corbyn, but Corbyn's not leader. I think it's that. Allowing that, maybe having a sort of like a number, like a Facebook Live thing, you know what I mean, connection, like a Zoom meeting from that, you know what I mean, and then from then on, it's a bit like a Socialist Alliance, you know what I mean. You're working out on an issue by issue how we can work together. I think that's what we've got to look at, you know what I mean,
Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. I think Andy's question is a good one. I was curious to quickly go over with yourselves, Sam included. How do you feel then that we could democratise the trade unions a bit more? Tina, do you have an idea on that there? And then we'll maybe go to some other questions. Sorry. Or Sam, do you want to talk about that? Or Tina, do you want to talk about that?
Well,
or Sam, go ahead. Sam.
The first thing I would like to say is, points have been made about the importance of trade union grassroots activities, campaigns, and people assisting from within the Labour Party, assisting trade unionists in their own areas, and the grassroots work that Donal O'Cofaigh has done. You can see, I followed that closely because it seemed to me to be the kind of a model there which could be applied to other places in Northern Ireland. It's extraordinarily important if it flourished. Real issues, comprehensible to ordinary people, stripped of jargon and the rest of it. But why did this not happen in those red wall? Now maybe Tina could explain this to me. Why in those red wall constituencies did the Corbyn Labour movement, why did it collapse so comprehensively into the arms of the Tories? Now the only sense I can make of it is that instead of battalions of, shall we say, English Donal O'Cofaighs at work in communities, you had keyboard warriors fighting one another and calling the right scumbags and the rest of it on Facebook and Twitter. They can't have been out involved in these grassroots campaigns with their unions or with their campaign groups, because they seem so utterly disconnected from so many working class people now. You can say that there's always been a traditionally socially conservative and indeed reactionary strand in the working class. Working class Tories have always been there, nothing new. But what efforts were made or were not made in since the great opportunity of 2017? What happened to that impetus in those areas? Why was not one more not done in those areas? Maybe Tina could.
I have very few answers on how to democratize the unions, which is a crucial question, but it depends on the class struggle, doesn't it? It's kind of all linked. So unless the class takes it up itself and fights for, you know, its rights, etc., I don't think you can democratize the unions from above or whatever. It really needs to come from below. Yeah, why did the Labour Party lose so badly in last December last year when it didn't, you know, in 2017 with Corbyn at the helm? It did much better. It had one of the best results of its history ever. And I think there's two answers to it. Firstly, I think the witch hunt against Corbyn was really took off and was expanded, etc. So in 2017 we already had the witch hunt against him, but it wasn't quite as common knowledge that he's an anti-Semite, that the Labour Party is anti-Semitic, that he's a nutcase, that etc. etc. So that really, I think it really worked its way through. You read the newspapers in Britain. I mean, I have to read it for my job every day, and it made my eyes bleed. It was absolute horrific. Every single day a new attack on Corbyn, doing this, doing that, and after time, you know, it sticks, and Corbyn didn't stand up to it well enough. You know, the Labour Party could have used the opportunity to put its own newspapers out, its own media. You know, there was very little of this. This kind of video here or there. But imagine, I mean, with $1 million that the Labour Party had, it could have, you know, produced much better a counterpoint of view in terms of all the attacks that the bourgeois press launched on him, including The Guardian, worst of all, perhaps The Guardian even, with a sort of natural Labour Party audience. Also, I think the Brexit position was pretty shit. He was forced from the right to adopt a Remain position towards the end. There was very little attempt, I think, by the Corbyn leadership, or I shouldn't just all pin it on Corbyn, but it was very little attempt by the leadership to put forward an internationalist point of view. I think it didn't inspire anybody. You know, I'm obviously not in favor I'm not in favor of leaving the European Union, quite the opposite, but there was no argument made from the left why it would be a good idea to stay in the European Union. All the pressure always came from the right. And so, you know, I could totally understand why people, you know, working class people got swallowed up by this argument. It's the immigrants, so it's, you know, they're taking our jobs, etc. And the Labour Party didn't really counter that with any kind of coherent argument that it's not, you know, and that there's a good thing about internationalism and staying with our brothers and sisters, and the bigger the unity, the better for our class. So it's another defeat, unfortunately, and a kind of self-made defeat. And I think that was these are 3 points which have led a lot to, I think, to the defeat in the recent elections.
Thanks very much, Lisa or Tina. Donald, you have an obvious insight into the trade union movement. You were also a secretary for Fermanagh Trade Union Council, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
How do you feel we can democratise the trade unions. Just before this meeting, funny enough, I was talking to other Labour Left Alliance members from Northern Ireland just about how it feels, from my perspective, that the trade unions don't have as much bite as I kind of envisioned them from, looking back on the various movements in the past. So how do you feel about this democratisation?
I would definitely agree with Tina that fundamentally the democratisation of the unions reflects the class struggle, the nature of mobilisation, the nature of, if there's not much struggle, if there's a lot of like social partnership or cooperative arrangements with management, as there are in particular unions are very, very of that direction, then you tend to get unions which are devoid of democracy as a result of that, because the last thing those who are concocting deals with management want, say for example, if a union was negotiating with a big employer right across the board, the last thing they'll want is active branches which would challenge that. So they tend to close down discussions, not invite people, keep them, dead. And I have to say, even generally, I think the first thing we must recognize is that class consciousness, as in working class socialist consciousness, took a massive hit on the back of the collapse of the Soviet Union and all that, and it was seen as a failure. And all my life, when I was a boy, hearing, "Oh, socialism never works," or "it doesn't work because it's against your the innate nature of humanity," and all these sort of arguments. And the reality is now, since 2008, there's been kind of generations raised who've never experienced anything like that. In fact, their experience is the opposite. So as they become a greater and greater part of the labour force, they are coming into trade unions which are largely staffed by people who have made a lot of times hard calls, maybe dirty deals even, and they don't want them to become active. So it's really about, can activism throw up a new layer of fresh leaders, new layers of working class people, women, people of colour, disadvantaged groups? Can they find expression in the unions? Often they can't. Often they're thrown back, they're disillusioned, so on and so forth. What can we do? Well, we can put ourselves in there and try and push that as much as we can, and that has to be done in an organised, coherent way. And I can definitely see the need for some sort of broad left within the union movement, which would cohere things. There are some unions more positive than others, but even then, most of the unions seem to be now moving towards some form of accepting collaboration with the Tory government in the national interest and all that sort of stuff, when we all know there's no such thing as national interest. But that's the sort of reality. The struggle is complex. There's never a simple answer to it. And just to go back to something else that was said there by Tina, that, about the education, and it's certainly true that you need to spend time educating people about socialism, what it is, the history of it, international aspects of it, all these different struggles, because there's absolute vast amounts to learn. I spend most of my time reading and trying to analyze, and then to try and apply it. That's the truth. And I think every activist should be, because there's so much to learn out there. Nearly everything you are doing and facing has already faced others in the past, and they've actually found good answers to a lot of this stuff. You don't have to reinvent the wheel through making mistakes. But equally, there is education through struggle. Education is not just a theoretical thing. It is something that you learn through practice. And therefore, as these workers come into the trade unions or into the campaigns, they learn through practice. They develop their understanding of the class nature of the state. They develop their understanding of the role and the agency of the working class. They develop their understanding of the international, the international aspects of the capitalist system, the need for a certain party or this party, or how we active within this party. But all these things are learned through struggle, but also through theory, and the two are interwoven together in a way you cannot take one from the other. So the education cannot simply be learning it by rote. It is only really learned through mass practice. And if you're going to quote Lenin, that's something he did say, that you can't actually learn without that. So how do you democratize? Is fighting and struggle. That's the only way you democratize anything. It's struggle. Just keep struggling. Organisation. Don't get angry. Organise is the secret, and it's the same for anything you're involved in.
That's great. Thanks very much, Donal. I think we're going to take then our next question from Anne. Hi, Anne. How's it going?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So thanks for today, and May Day greetings to all comrades.
Thank you.
I'm living here in Cork, in Cove, which some of you may know. My history is that I was involved in the left in Britain for 20 years and came back here to Ireland about 14 years ago. So I have a sort of a dual affiliation, I suppose, really in a way, with the working class movement in Britain and also with a struggle here in Ireland. And really what I wanted to raise is two things. There's one thing that has really come up from the discussion, which I think is an important question to further analyse and develop, is the question of politics. I suppose it's a question of high politics or grassroots struggle, and how those two connect. And certainly here at the moment, I would say we can see very clearly, because of the role of this pandemic, because of the effect of this pandemic, that we are in we're in a situation where we need universal answers with the global pandemic, which is affecting everybody, almost everybody on the globe, and even more so in countries where you wouldn't expect it to happen, have such an effect as in the United States. Here in Ireland, here in the south of Ireland, the Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach and the government, who are obviously people will know, have not actually been elected because they didn't have enough to form a majority, but now they're trying to go into government with the Green Party. They seem to be really riding high in the polls despite their defeat in the election. And I mean, they really have nothing to be proud about. Then I look at Northern Ireland and I can see the situation in Northern Ireland. And one thing that keeps coming up, and I think it's part of something that what I would suggest that we need to discuss, is the continuing national question in Ireland. Here in the south, Sinn Féin did really well in the elections. I didn't vote for Sinn Féin. I agree with Donal that Sinn Féin are not the answer, but in the absence of a clear and coherent left, they have stood into the, I suppose, the place of that. So I would suggest, this is my suggestion, because I think that these LLA meetings and events online have been really useful and can play an important cohering and educational role, is that maybe the comrades like in Northern Ireland could think about having LLA education, LLA debates on the national question, on the continuing relationship of the North and the South, and on the relationship between the North of Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Clearly the national question has not gone away. The Sinn Féin are still pushing it here in the South. You know, you get polls all the time talking about how many people in the South support the United Ireland. I would be interested to know what other panelists think on that question. I am an internationalist, so I'm not saying that necessarily we should have a United Ireland that separates off, or, well, perhaps I do think that actually, but like with democratic rights for all peoples of these islands. But I just think it's an important question that hasn't gone away. And I think that when you talk about issues like, say, for instance, the trade union movement in the north of Ireland, the trade union movement in the south of Ireland, the national question affects everything. So in the Northern Ireland Labour Party, you're in a sort of funny position, aren't you? Because you seem to have a very, you have a big membership, but yet you're not allowed to stand in an election because a deal was done so that the SDLP would be the arm of the Labour Party in Northern Ireland. That's my second question, is like, how do you square that circle? That's a funny situation for you to be in, because you can't really, I think Donal spoke about, you can't really make an impact in an election when you can't stand in the election. What can you do? And just finally, the Labour Party in the south of Ireland has been completely, it's been annihilated in the election, and quite rightly so, because of its role in repressing the struggles of the working class around the water charges movement. and the Labour Party has been, I would say, largely, perhaps temporarily, replaced by Sinn Féin. But I can't see very many people wanting to go into the Labour Party in the south of Ireland. I certainly wouldn't be inclined to do so. But the problem is, for us here in the south, people like myself who want to be involved in an organisation where you have democratic rights and you can say what you think, is that the only other option are the small groups. And unfortunately, they're not. That's not going to get us anywhere. Anyway, so look, really, my question is: would you think about taking initiative on education and debate on the question of Ireland at the present time, the left and the relationship with Britain and the British Labour movement? And yeah, that's it. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's really great to have people from all over the British Isles, you know, not just Northern Ireland, but also as far as Cork. And I saw in the chat there was people from Brighton. You know, it's great to have this really broad base. Sam can obviously talk about this too, but I just wanted to say, you know, whenever we formed this first meeting, we were conscious of you know, talking about the Irish question, talking about sectarian politics, talking about the labour movement across these islands and across this island. And we thought that we didn't want to distract, you know, too much from just talking about organising in general. But it is something that I would love to talk about with other comrades about how you would discuss this in a non-sectarian way to people, because as a part of LPNI, you know, the Irish question is one that people always confront us with, and it's one that we never shy away from talking about. I think Sam is far more insightful than me about this topic, so I would love for him to kind of discuss this.
Well, there's one thing for sure, and that is the virus doesn't respect any borders. And I certainly think there should have been far more cooperation between the governments north and south than there has been. Now, on the question of the national question, LPNI has within its ranks people who are pro-United Ireland and others who are not, and others who are neutral on the issue because they want to know what sort of offer would be there, what would it bring to the working classes north and south, what would Irish unity actually practically mean for them. And a lot of that hasn't really been yet made clear. The other thing is that a lot of people in LPNI take the view that a priority has to be in the interim to unite working class people in the north if you want to prepare them for a new future in a new Ireland. You've got to have initiatives here on the ground that will bring them together around campaigns, pay and conditions and health service and so on that already unite them. And unfortunately, I don't see parties, well, obviously on the unionist side or on the Republican side, doing that. As for the link up between the British Labour Party or the UK Labour Party as it is and the SDLP, unfortunately, Sir Keir Starmer has, I think, put himself back into the position of regarding the SDLP as an adequate sister party surrogate for the Labour Party here in the north. And this is despite the fact that the SDLP is now in a formal political alliance with who? Fianna Fáil. And we need to challenge Starmer on this as soon as possible. But to go back to the question, yeah, the question raised was very, very pertinent. And I think Labour Party in Northern Ireland can't run away from addressing the national question and having proper debate on the national question. I think that has to be done.
Tina, do you want to talk about this before maybe going to Donal?
Very quickly. Funnily enough, as people found out that I'm speaking at your session, comrades in our education working group, LLA Education Working Group, suggested we should actually have a webinar on the national question in Ireland, which quite rightly is a huge question still. I agree with Anne in terms of the politics of it. It's obviously based on a huge historical injustice, what had happened in Ireland. But you know, obviously today you have a situation where there is Northern Ireland and there is a south of Ireland, and you have to have some kind of democratic answer to that is not based on, you know, driving one section of the population to the sea or just telling them to fuck off or get on with it. So it's a huge discussion, it's a huge question, and I would really hope we can organize something together on that, actually a sort of, you know, international LLA education event. And we do run 2 a week at the moment, and we're hoping to keep it up actually. So every Thursday we have history of the labour movement, and then every Tuesday we are trying to put on something else that is of importance. So next Tuesday we're doing Rosa Luxemburg and the German Revolution, but perhaps the Tuesday after that would be fantastic if we could put that on with a few speakers looking at the history as well as the current situation, and the way forward would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's a lot to discuss, and you know, people have a kind of, and both sides have a one-dimensional view of it. There's a lot of interesting statistics, a lot of interesting ideas revolving around how you know, a new Ireland would look if there was a United Ireland. You know, how do you fight for that without being sectarian is a big question, a big topic to discuss. How do you engage in people? Like I said, like how do you bring up this idea of United Ireland without instantly becoming a sectarian fight? But also respecting the democracy of people who do want to maybe a bit of self-determination for the region of Northern Ireland, you know, is something that I don't think is a controversial topic. So like Sam said, it's always worth engaging in that. Donal, you know, you mentioned earlier that you obviously worked with Sinn Féin at the start, so you have that insight of how Sinn Féin have approached it. I'd definitely like to hear how you would feel about this. How do you discuss the Irish question from the Labour movement?
I think the first thing to say is that you can't escape the national question if you're organising as a socialist in Northern Ireland. It's the first thing and the last thing you should nearly think about in every aspect of what you're doing, because if you're trying to build a movement, you often find that the actors from either side can get involved for whatever reason, because the greatest threat that they face is the unity of working class people, because a lot of their ideology is predicated on keeping people apart, and therefore they can control them and marshal their support when it comes to elections. And that's precisely why when you get elections, they just kick up the sectarianism and reinforce their own support base by mobilizing it. But there is a growing number of people who are completely alienated from that. And in particular, I think there's a growing number of working class people who are looking towards the trade unions and the kind of left traditions, labour traditions as an alternative. And I think that's reflected in my own election. But I think it is a complicated issue. There are no simple answers. There is a genuine risk, if you was to push a United Ireland at this stage, that there could be a complete catastrophe resulting out of it, balkanisation of Northern Ireland. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility by any means at all. There are still many areas of Northern Ireland which would be impossible for the Irish Army to patrol, if you think about it in those terms. And you don't want to go down that road as a socialist. What we need to emphasise is the unity of working class people, but it's not just a theoretical unity. It's something that they learn and they practice and they educate themselves about through practice and through struggle together. And that's precisely the role of the trade unions, because they're the only vehicles, really, mass vehicles in Northern Ireland, which bring together working class Protestants and Catholics and others together in a progressive collaboration for improvement. And it's precisely in that vehicle. That's why Labour is the threat to the nationalist and the unionist ideologies. That's why Carson and Craig look more fearful on the Labour Party of its day than they did on any nationalist. They welcome nationalists in because they can deal with nationalists because there's a gerrymandered majority for them. But when it's Labour, when it's bringing people together, that can take the feet from underneath them. And that's the sort of politics I think we can transform this place with. But I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where you can have a United Ireland dream of a capitalist United Ireland, which is somehow completely disconnected from England, Scotland and Wales. That's not going to happen either. So I think we need to talk about how we can have a socialist Ireland maybe, but also in connection with a socialist England, Wales and Scotland, our comrades over there, and Europe, how we can have that. But I think the solution to the national question is implicit in the socialist question.
Definitely. I think Donal was just about to quote Connolly there about, you lower one flag of the British Empire and you raise another flag of a capitalist Ireland is probably the easiest way to explain how a lot of people feel about this situation. And exactly what Donal said there about the balkanization, where you're just going to go from, obviously one of imperial instigation in Northern Ireland has caused the British Army to have to come in. And then you're talking about United Ireland, that if it's dragged, I think it's the best way to see it, is if it's dragged that way without being an understanding among working class people, how it can benefit them. If it is a benefit to the working class people and they are aware of it, you won't going to have a situation where you're going to have a reverse of the current problems we have here, where how would the Irish state have to control and manage sectarian flare-ups from the unionist community. But of course, this is a whole topic we can discuss in a webinar. I think a lot of people would appreciate that. I see a lot of people in the chat are appreciative of that. We've currently been talking for just under 2 hours here. I hope the panelists are okay to continue. Or I don't know if they need to go anywhere yet. We have some more questions from some other people in the attendance. I think we have Harry Hutchinson, Elaine and David. Okay. I think we'll go with Elaine first. She is another member of Labour Left Alliance Northern Ireland, as well as Andy Ward earlier. So, Elaine, do you have a question?
I've asked her to, you have to start your camera.
I think I was talking to her earlier. She was having some technical difficulties with her camera.
Is it me, Andy? Or is it me? Oh, sorry, Eileen.
Yes, go ahead, sorry.
All right, sorry. Well, my question, I suppose, first of all, I want to raise a few things. In different regions, you have different situations. For instance, in Derry, Sinn Féin done really badly because we had Alicia McCallion, who wasn't a particularly good candidate, but she lost her seat, which was a very staunch Sinn Féin seat by something like 17,000. She was absolutely decimated here. And in Derry, we have seen Sinn Féin not as a working class as it is throughout Northern Ireland. So maybe that will happen in the south of Ireland, who knows? But what I would really like to know is, because at the moment we cannot stand candidates, could we get behind other left-wing candidates in the area? Or will we stand, maybe build broad church campaigns, maybe around situations like, how are we going to get back to work to ensure workers feel safe in their environment and they're not put under pressure to go back into work and put their lives, the lives of their family at risk? If we could have, maybe a broad set of guidelines to say, people shouldn't be going back to work, feel under pressure unless they know that they're not putting themselves or their family at risk. That'd be one question I'd like to ask. Could we, maybe launch a campaign around that? Would we be willing to maybe support other left-wing candidates while we're waiting to maybe be able to stand at present? And the other thing, I suppose, as the general point is, I was in the Labour Party a long time ago, and Liverpool, during the anti-poll tax campaign, we had a big fight within the Labour Party, where the right wing didn't support us not paying the poll tax, and we had people within the right who then refused to pay the poll tax because they had to pay our poll tax, which was a kind of ridiculous situation. But politics can change in very different ways, and it's about we have a fantastic opportunity at the moment, but it's scary, and somebody's going to grab that ground, I think, and it's about how do we organise ourselves and where do we put our energy. The other, I suppose, last thing I'd like to say is just recommend the film Jimmy Hole, which is Ken Loach's a brilliant film, and the other one, I suppose, the one that Sheikh Sabari on Irish thing, but definitely Jimmy Hole was fantastic, and that was kind of how scared the church was when they seen working people getting together. You know, they were appalled by that.
Oh, thanks very much, Eileen. So I think the first question then maybe to ask to Sam again. You know, he's experienced as an LPNI member about this question, and maybe then put it to Tina and Donal as more broad question. How should we organise? We can't stand here. How do we organise behind opposing the dangerous work practices that the government could impose after this lockdown's over?
Well, on the first of those, there's no doubt that the general election of 2019 in Northern Ireland produced a reaction against the establishment parties, Sinn Féin and the DUP, for the obvious reason that they had abnegated their responsibilities by having collapsed the Stormont Assembly for a number of years, while still drawing the bulk of their salaries. And that benefited primarily the Alliance Party, and obviously also in Derry, the SDLP, where Sinn Féin lost their seat. It's a great pity that there wasn't a raft of Labour candidates ready to stand in that breach. I mean, given that opportunity, but that's not the case. Now, LPNI members can't wait about forever and a day for the party to grant them the right to stand. That would be foolish in the extreme. And they haven't done because a candidate was actually stood, Eileen, if you remember, in Fermanagh, South Tyrone in December 2019. That was Caroline, Caroline Wheeler. And Caroline stood as an independent, albeit under a Labour banner, in lieu of being able to stand as an official candidate. And in other places, Labour Party members supported who they thought was nearest to their own policy positions in Belfast and Derry and so on. So I think that's the first one. I mean, going forward, I think probably, without getting into all of this in too much detail, the Labour Party in Northern Ireland is possibly going to have to resort to legal action against the Labour Party on grounds of discrimination against its members here in the North. Sadly, but there you are. The second one is very, very important. It seems to me that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party at the moment are asking the Tories to give them their, and you can see the strategic reason for it, to give them an exit policy and so on. But Labour ought to be more proactive in this, surely. Labour and trade union people ought to be more proactive in saying, look, we're not going to support any situation where workers are put out prematurely into potential danger of their lives simply to get the capitalist machine up and running again and get profits going again at the expense of workers' lives. That can't happen. And around the region, trade unionists and Labour people have got to try and put their stamp on this as much as they can.
Tina, Tina, do you want to talk then maybe on the idea that, you know, it's the same with what was mentioned earlier about Anne, about how there's no real left, popular left base here. It is like Donal has had to deal with. There's a kind of a fight going on with a lot of smaller socialist groups having to work towards different goals. You know, how do you respond to trying to fight against, you know, what's going to happen after lockdown, whenever you don't have that popular left that's maybe fighting for that side of the argument?
I won't pretend to be an expert on Labour Party Northern Ireland.
Yes.
It is up to comrades to organise, you know, how they. how comrades want to organise, etc. Few things I'd say is legal action. Being Labour against the witch hunt is, I've dealt with a few comrades who thought they have success, justice on their side, etc. And, you know, they've been expelled illegally, etc. And they took it to the court and they got hammered and they lost a fortune in the process. Lady Justice is not blind, and usually the person with a deeper pocket wins. So I normally recommend don't do it if you if you think you'll be successful. But you know, Mark Wadsworth, Jackie Walker, etc. Others thought they'd be successful and they weren't. It's a huge problem that you know, the better lawyers get you better results. Well, expensive lawyers get you better results. So think about it, I'd say. In general, I think the fight has to be fought politically. I mean, have comrades tried putting motions forward? I mean, I have to confess, I don't know much about this at all. So it just seems that motions to conference, etc., would be a useful thing to do. The comrades might have tried this. I don't know much about that. Supporting left-wing candidates, obviously that's what you kind of end up doing. Of course, according to the Labour rules, that's illegal, and that could get you chucked out if you support candidates from other parties. I'm not sure if that's different now in your circumstance, because you're not allowed to stand. Presumably it is different, but in obviously in the rest of Britain it is, you're not allowed to support them. But of course you have to support the SLPD, but I don't know what happens if you support somebody, some other group. So I'm not an expert on that at all, just a few questions to keep in mind.
I think Sam can answer that as well, but we have supported left-wing candidates before. Donal is one of them that we've worked with. Donal has a bit of experience on what happens whenever you act on those Labour policies, but the Labour Party obviously doesn't want you to stand. So maybe Donal can talk about that himself.
Yeah, obviously the Labour Party does. I've moved out here because it's nice and sunny, so I'd rather be out in the sun for that. We don't get that much of it out here. So anyway, one of the things is that Caroline Wheeler's candidacy showed that there is a potential there. It was a decisive intervention by the Labour Party, and we need to connect candidates running with who, like Caroline, have a genuine connection to struggle on the ground. Caroline's a very prominent trade unionist. She sits on the executive of Unite in the region. She's also very prominent activist around care homes and the like. So she was a strong Labour candidate running as an independent, unfortunately. And I think we're going to have to look at opportunities such as that, such as back in independent cross-community candidates who are running on a Labour ticket. And I think that would be a mechanism to really pursue on the ground, where you're in the Labour Party, you have to run as an independent. Where you're not in the Labour Party, then you may have more freedom. You can run under a different name or whatever. But basically speaking, we need to see candidates going forward, because unless we show a political alternative, we're going to be confined just to trade union defensive kind of struggles, and that's where it's at. In terms of the issue of going back to returning to work, a lot of the unions are already saying that unless the workplaces are safe, that there should be no return. But I do notice yesterday in the United States, there were walkouts right across Amazon and a lot of other delivery businesses around the denial of PPE. And it's not to be discounted that there could be something similar across Britain, across Northern Ireland, that, you know, workers walk out. There is a potential for that. There is a potential of a postal strike in the next few days as well, or weeks rather. So we are, there's a lot of things can happen, and I think Labour should be the activists in the Labour Party. If you're going to stay inside, then I think certainly keep active and connect into whatever struggles are around you.
Thanks very much, Donal. David is next to answer or ask a question. Sorry. David has been patiently waiting. He's a activist from Liverpool that I linked up with personally at a Labour Party conference there in Brighton, and you know, he's got a lot of insights into a lot of his struggles. So I'd like to hear from him. Go ahead, David.
Oh, cheers! Thanks, comrades. So you know, I'd just like to say, like, you know, to clarify that, like, I'm a member of the Labour Party. I'm a democratic socialist, and I'm also a member of Veterans for Peace. I didn't do any significant active operations in Northern Ireland, but I'm familiar with the area and I have a lot of comrades that have been in and out of that. What I would like to say from the off is that, like, I think that, and I say my politics stems from my opposition to the military-industrial complex and the structures around that. So that's sort of where my socialism stems from. What I'll say is that, like, I think that democratic socialism, and I agree with Donal, could remove, I think it's the only, like, real path towards the removal of sectarianism from politics in Northern Ireland. I can't see how you're going to do it otherwise, to be honest. I believe that the sectarian politics in Northern Ireland and the shared power leaves the Northern Irish Assembly open to becoming, if it hasn't already become, I think it already has, a Christian fundamentalist hegemony that supports globalisation. And from when my conversations with Lewis I've had, that's what I have got from it. As I say, democratic socialism seems to be the only path forward to break that deadlock. You know, I think that Northern Irish Labour Party not being allowed to stand candidates is actually a crime against UK democracy. And I do think it's an actual crime. And you're being treated like second-class citizens. It's not democratic. It's not democratic. In the legal sense, and it talks that, you know, we have a comrade, Duncan Shipley Dalton, who's now in the UK Labour Party, but he was in Northern Irish Assembly at one point. He was at the Northern Irish Labour Party meeting in Brighton, and I was sat with him. You know, we're both ex-soldiers, we're both looking at, you know, democratic socialism. So, you know, I personally am fighting for the representation of veterans and families within the Labour Party. To try and bring the military into the workers' movement, which is a controversial point, especially over there, but hear me out on it. I wanted to have representation for my community, and I suppose it's our community in the sense, because it's an intersectional group, to fight for the unionisation of the military, to fight for workers' rights, and to have accountability for these politicians and the like that create these policies that, you know, that send us, you know, that like there should be accountability for people that create policy that send people into war zones, you know, and I do think that, you know, to be fair, and there's the moment the people that, like, did the worst stuff in Northern Ireland did it with the stroke of a pen. And, like, that's, you know, and that's, and then the actors on that, like, I mean, abhorrent stuff happened, abhorrent stuff. Another thing for, like, bringing veterans representation, representation Labour Party, and pushing for the unionisation is to remove the private sector from the weapons industry to enable defence diversification. And to remove, you know, PFI from the MOD, because these are all monetary drivers that push towards conflict and war in general, and it affects everybody. And I think it's the surest route to attack the military-industrial complex and perhaps try and form some form of true internationalism instead of humanitarian interventionist war, which is a cover for imperialism, on a corporate imperialism, really, because these companies are bigger than nation states. I don't know where Northern Irish Labour Party can fit into this representation, because I know that culturally over there, because of the troubles and that, it's a difficult subject. And also I acknowledge that the paramilitaries as well were pawns in the military-industrial complex. I mean, the Northern Ireland conflict allowed anti-terror laws that were draconian to be used to infiltrate trade unions, using the spy cops and all that. It's like, same with, like, the Cold War. They use all this, there is an enemy, Now we're going to put some draconian measures in to attack your civil liberties. And everyone seems to be a pawn to this system, and everybody gets exploited. I also acknowledge that, like, it's not just the people that were who took part in that conflict as active service members are probably going to be suffering from similar things to what the UK troops are, with even less support, and probably suffering badly. There's also the issue of the Northern Irish civilian population that's going to be suffering the trauma of conflict. I'll say war in some aspects, and I don't know how this is being addressed because I haven't spoke to anyone over there, and that, but I know it's an issue for me. But what I know is that in terms of veterans' representation within the Labour Party, to try and attack the military-industrial complex, to try and create a form of peace and have a form of military that actually defends the nation state, be it on the UK mainland or, you know, over in Northern Ireland. It should be defending the people. It should be helping the people in terms of flood and support for COVID, and we should be better trained for that. And it means really changing what the military actually is. And I do think that we need to do that. I know that I need people from Northern Ireland who are over there to determine how they fit in the Labour movement and the community. But I do believe that bringing in veterans from all sides of these factions under the flag of socialism in a cross-community basis could spearhead this action, you know. So I really do believe that, and I think that, like, you know, we should be trying to encourage these difficult talks. So I'm willing to talk to anybody about it. I don't care what side of the fence that they're on. I'm a socialist first, you know, and I think that's what we should be working towards. It's complex, but, you know, I think it's going to be another discussion. I don't know if anybody's got anything to come back on that, or if anybody can enlighten me or help me or have any suggestions for that conundrum. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks very much, David. Like I said, David and me had a talk at the Brighton conference about this, and it's quite a hard question, but it's one that needs asked, especially in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole, about how do you look at what happened in the Troubles, because Sam and Donal are well aware of the PTSD issues that the general public have, never mind the paramilitaries, what they obviously had to do and did. I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm just talking on it as a purely psychological side, where, you know, there's a lot of latent problems, and that's why we have such a high suicide rate in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the UK and even most of Western Europe. It's quite high. So I think what David said is maybe not something that you know, Tina can talk on specifically for Northern Ireland, but it is a part of it is that I would like to ask Tina is maybe more, how do you know, get veterans, people who are in the military, how do you have them feel a part of the working class? And because that's something that was organised as a vicious attack on Jeremy Corbyn, and it's something that I think that no matter what socialist is in place, they will be attacked on this, you know, as anti-patriotic. It's one of the worst things you can be tagged with by the press. How do you welcome veterans into the working class?
Actually a really important question, and again something where we can look at history to learn quite a lot from. It was interesting, as you mentioned, Jeremy Corbyn, there was an anonymous general who said he will not serve under Jeremy Corbyn if he becomes Prime Minister, and there would be a mutiny, etc. So that is interesting, the role of the army and the military, isn't it? I mean, of course I'm in favour of police, the army having unions is very important, that workers can get together and fight for better conditions and to expose some of the crimes that are going on. Quite right. So we need to have as much democracy in those existing structures as they are, as we can. But I think we have to actually look a bit further than just democratizing what is and fight for what we need. The standing army as a professional army, as one where you get taught to switch off your brain, where you get taught to lick boots, you know, no offense to any soldiers in the audience or whatever, but that is the point, isn't it? It's the point of the education of making soldiers. It is to make them into unthinking machines, not exaggerating it, but who will go out and kill and murder and do what capitalism tells them to, and what their boss tells them to, without questions. And that is a problem of a professional army, because it does shut them off from normal working class struggles. It puts them there. That's their job. That's what they do, and that's those people doing that. In Germany, until very recently, for example, you had the army was made up of normal working class people. Everybody had to do it, and in other countries it works like that as well. So everybody had to do that 2 years stint. You know, can't say that many friends of mine enjoyed it, and most of them did social service instead. But there is something to be said for having normal working class people learning that particular trade. First of all, they know how to use a weapon, can come in handy sometimes. Secondly, though, it is made up of normal working class people who are part of, you know, their community back home. They know what's going on. They know who these people telling them to switch off their brains. You know, why should we do that? You know, I'm in a union in my normal job, so why should I switch off my intellectual faculties here? So it's much easier to politicize an army made up of normal working class people, and to, of course, in the long term, break it from the state, and that's what you need if you're a Marxist, a revolutionary. You need the army on your side, or you need to have at least a few battalions on your side to fight with you, because not getting into too much details about what revolution will be like, but that if you have the army on your side, the chances that it gets violent are slimmer. You know, if you have them on your side, you probably don't have to use any violence for the day the revolution comes, if it ever comes again. So I'm in favor of abolishing the standing army, and that should be a demand that I think the left should consider, that we can police ourselves. I think we're well capable of running our own lives and making decisions about what's right and what's wrong, with a bit of training, etc. So there's a short-term solution. Yes, of course, unionization, democratization, what is, but actually a far bigger issues further away.
Thanks very much. Yes, I think David would agree with you on what you said about how the military kind of shapes your mindset. He, like I said, he's talking before about it, about how it turns you into this machine, like you said. Donal, I think it was only last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, there was discussion among the Northern Ireland Executive and the Assembly, I guess, about bringing in be it the British military or the Irish military to assist with logistics up here. So it is something that's within our political realm right now. So how would you speak about how do we deal with the military in Northern Ireland, both standard and paramilitary?
Yeah, I didn't catch fully your question, I have to say, because there's a bit of lag in the video here, but certainly the issue of the British Army is one that would be very divisive in Northern Ireland for obvious reasons, in terms of their activity on the ground. But there has been, in the past occasions when the Irish Army and the British Army have come and, for example, provided fodder to cattle in mountain areas and so on. So it isn't exactly impossible. But one thing I would say is that the issue of, I think, what was said previously in terms of workers in uniform and the need to move away from a standing army, very important objectives. But I think the key thing is that there's a huge level of economic conscription, effectively. Workers from Wales or from Scotland or from English areas where there's no hope at all of getting a job, go to the British Army, get a job, and then they're posted somewhere and they do terrible things, and that's the nature of capitalism, and that's what we're dealing with. So we can't blame the individuals, and I think that's the key thing. It's never about the individual. It's about the system as a whole, and we must keep our attention, while we obviously have to act against specific instances of oppression and repressive legislation, of course. We must also try to link up with workers, and the idea of trade unions or political organisations in the army are something that we should look at as radical as a radical democratic demand. Why not see these workers get organised and actually stand up for themselves? So the whole issue of paramilitarism is another question, and the idea of arming the people it can be perverted in Northern Ireland to mean arming one side and then the other side. Whereas what I think we always need to say is that the trade unions themselves actually should be the ones, if anybody's to be armed, there should be the workers should be there should be a collective approach to the working class as a whole empowering itself, and that has happened in the past. It sounds a bit mad today, but you look at 1969 and 1968, when workers actually were quite effective in stopping the early pogroms, and they actually prevented people from being burnt out of their houses a lot of the time. Did happen. And those were the days when shop stewards was on every street corner, every estate. You'd had a shop steward that was carried great authority. And I think we need to see how we can reinvigorate some of those traditions. But if you don't have an active trade union movement, then that can be a difficulty. So it's all interwoven, and none of it's easy, and it's just constant. Another area for struggle.
Thanks very much, Donal. So I think that's all the questions really that people have been asking about. We cover a big range of topics here. It's fantastic to have two speakers who can answer nearly every aspect of socialism, and from the military right up to how do you organise inside a Labour Party CLP. So Sam, would you like to say anything, about the webinar? How do you feel it's went, or any closing remarks at all?
I think it's been very useful, Lewis, and fair play to you for chairing it so well, and thanks to both Tina and Donal. And I think we should build on this. Undoubtedly, there's been a number of themes that I'm sure we can identify and run back over, and I think we could pick up on something there. And the whole educational strand that came through is crucial in all of this.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'd like to say thanks very much again to Tina and Donal. I really appreciate the opportunity to host this meeting with you and have you on board to discuss this. We've had up to, I think it was over 20 people at one point in here working on this. So thanks very much for everything.